Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Practical Training Podcast, brought to you by Practical Training Professionals right here in beautiful Southern Maryland. Today, we are joined virtually through Zoom. We had some shenanigans with the stream service there, but we did make it happen. Today, we're joined by Mr. That Weems, First Person Safety. They're down in Georgia. So we're bringing the Georgia guy on the show tonight. This guy has an extensive background in law enforcement. He's got all the certifications, all of the, certificates that shows that he knows what he's talking about. You can find out more about him on social media just by looking up That Weems or by going online to First Person Safety. He also, ironically, if you want to think of it that way, is also the host of a podcast called That Weems Guy. And I want to give you what they talk about, but if you just search them on Apple Podcast or Spotify or any other platform like that, you'll find out. It's how do you put it on the show? It's I talk to guys about things or something like that. You have a very simple description. And I wanted to ask you about that before we get into talking guns and stuff. That's a very basic description. If somebody wanted to find out what That Weems Guy's show was about, how would you summarize it to them?
Well, it's just me talking to my guest about stuff. That's all it is. I joke, but in all seriousness, it's an accidental show. It was not something that was planned or something that I set out to do. For 12 years of my career, I was the public information officer for my sheriff's office. And so if you Googled me or, any kind of other social media search, you would get 2-3 pages of videos of me talking about a fatal crash from 5 years ago.
Okay.
Or a burglary case or something like that. And so nobody was really finding stuff about my firearms training business if you did the Google thing. Mm-hmm. So a secondary benefit of the accidental show is that it's now putting a bunch of firearms content out there for prospective customers that are looking, looking for firearms training or looking for information about me specifically or my guests. Mm-hmm. So now those videos are popping up instead of me telling you to lock your doors and windows.
That's right.
The other part of it is I wanted to create a library of resources for people who were either interested in becoming firearms instructors or wanted to get better as firearms instructors. And originally I was just, and I actually kind of fell into that. Originally I was doing some what I call little stop and think videos. They were like a little short clip. I put it up and was going to get, basically comments on Facebook and everything like that and try to drive some narrative. Mm-hmm. And quickly I got answers from a couple of guys that I thought were really good. So I asked them to send me video clips that I then put out. Here's a response to this question that I asked. And it very quickly became evident that doing a Zoom type or StreamYard type interview was easier than trying to swap video clips.
Yeah.
And so I was just putting them up on the YouTube channel, and I started getting requests for people to put them in podcast form. So I went back and uploaded all the audio at once from like the first 10 or 11 episodes onto the Anchor platform, which distributes to all the others. And so since then I'm doing both YouTube and the podcast.
And you're putting out about one a week? Are you pretty religious about that?
Yeah, right now I'm having them all debut at 7:00 on Monday morning. Excellent. And so that it gets the whole week for the numbers. The last 2 episodes have been our biggest 2 so far as numbers go. We are now, the daily average is up to the 30-day average of views for each of them is up to over 100 now. Awesome. The YouTube videos, they get anywhere between 150 to 200 within the first week that they roll out views. And some of them have gotten up to 500 and 600 views, but they've been up on the page for a few months.
I mean, you guys talk about good stuff, and I've listened to, so everybody that's listening now knows I did an episode with Spencer Keepers, and then I saw that you had done one with him also, and I listened to that one. Spencer Keepers is a great guy. And I was listening this morning to the one you put out with Daryl Bulk. I think I'm saying that right.
Bulky.
I mean, you're talking to guys, Lee, that are known in the industry, that have their own kind of following of people that say, hey, I trust this guy. If he's got something to say, I want to listen to him.
Right.
which is another reason why I wanted to bring you on the show, Lee. You're well known in the industry. You've got, you've got the coins, right? You've got the t-shirts, you've been there, you've done that, and you're certified by a lot of these other instructors to carry their stuff, right? And to speak on their behalf. And you're the guy, that people need to find if they're down in Georgia and you're seeking out training. And we were talking about this before the show. Lee's actually going to be in the area where I train at here coming up in the new year. And we'll get into more of that here at the end, but Lee's not just down in Georgia. He does travel. So find First Person Safety on the internet. You can find all his classes. I found some of them that were listed through Eventbrite. You'll be able to find them all over the place. He will be probably coming to a gun range near you at some point. But when we were talking about that, Lee, you were saying that, I talked to this guy. It was one of the first episodes we did. And when he started, he didn't have a home range where he taught from. He traveled. That's all he did. And he said, the rock star kind of life where you're going up and you're the guy, you really enjoyed that, but he lost his marriage, or his fiance rather, right? She couldn't deal with that. He didn't really have his home range where he could train, there was none of that stuff. And he ended up giving up the kind of traveling training stuff. And you were saying something that here in the next year or two, you might try to back that down a little bit. Is that right?
Well, I just recently transitioned back into an hourly employee role. I was the chief deputy for the previous sheriff for 3 terms, which is 12 years. My sheriff that appointed me as chief deputy retired. A new sheriff was elected, and I stayed on with him as his training director. But that position is an hourly employee. It's not a salaried position. So I'm in the point where I've got to take annual leave if I'm going to be gone to teach for my personal business.
Right.
I don't want to take all of my leave time to work.
I get it.
So what I'm doing is I've booked 3 what I call travel classes for next year. That's 3 classes that I'm going to have to take leave from to go teach. And then I've got 2 conferences that I'm going to be at. So that's 5 times that I'm traveling basically for the business next year. And that's probably all I'm going to do per year. And when I say travel class, that means me taking time off of work. Sure. Now, I've got some other stuff that's going to be coming online probably soon in Alabama and maybe another place in North Carolina that I can leave on Friday after work, get to teach Saturday morning and come home Saturday evening, or teach Saturday and Sunday and come home on Sunday and not have to take any leave. But I am trying to limit being gone from home for the business to 1 week in a month.
That's a good move, man. So let me back up in time here a little bit. So, Lee, your background is in law enforcement, right? When did you, how long have you served? When did you start? Kind of give us the background on Lee Weems here.
Well, it's kind of funny. I graduated from high school and I was never going to set foot in a classroom again. That was my plan. And after, 4 years of factory job life, I decided, what, maybe there's a better way to go about the rest of this life that I've got to live. And so I enrolled in a college, and my intent was to be a middle school social studies and English teacher.
Okay.
And so that's what I started off as. My first 3 years I was a middle grades education major. And I get to my senior year, and they tell me that I'm going to have to do a block schedule with my student teaching, and that I'm not allowed to have a job. Well, at this point, I'm 26 years old.
Yeah.
I've got
some money.
Yeah, I've got bills to pay. I've got,
right.
I got to have a house. I got to have a place to live. And I told my advisor, I said, I can't quit my job to do this. And they were pretty insistent it was going to have to happen. So I changed majors. I was closer to a political science degree than anything else. So I wound up with an undergraduate degree in political science with a minor in history. Well, I knew that's, other than the fact that you have a college degree, that's not a very employable degree field. And so I began looking for ways to go to graduate school. And I found a university police department that as part of working for the PD, you got tuition at the university. And so that's how I got my master's degree. And then from that, I was appointed as the chief deputy of the Oconee County, Georgia Sheriff's Office, and I served in that position for 12 years. So I've been in law enforcement since 1999. I'm well into my 23rd year at this point.
That's a long career, man. A lot of people would
Yeah.
have hung it up after 20 and kind of took the retirement if it was offered.
Well, our retirement systems aren't like the big city retirement systems. I'm still a long way from when I can actually draw any money. I did tell one of the younger guys today that year 3 was a whole lot more fun than year 23.
Oh, I bet.
So yeah, it was a whole lot more fun back in the days when it was go out and chase the bad guys and just go home.
So what's the transition then from, I guess, depending on, what your role is at the station, some people kind of naturally, and then especially Lee, you mentioning that you had, you wanted to be a teacher, right? When you started out, and then you went into law enforcement. So there seems to be this natural progression where you would take the skills that you were developing and then try to teach them to somebody else. So it actually makes a lot of sense. When in your career did you become, the training guy, and from just, the guy, not the guy that gets up every day, puts on his duty belt and go catches bad guys. When did you start training other people to do the job?
Oh, well, right from the start, I was interested in training, and that had a lot to do with things that I pursued in my career. From some basic academy instruction that I was sitting in the classroom going, you know what? I've never been a cop for a day yet, but I know that's not right.
Sure.
And so I can do better than that. So right from the start, I had interest. Plus, I graduated from college on December 17th. The academy started January the 4th. And so I had just gone from the academic setting right into the academy setting and then so forth and everything. In my agency, the first promotion was to corporal, which corporal was a field training officer. That was the job. And so to get promoted, you had to be willing to train other people.
Sure.
And so I got promoted to corporal a little over 2 years into the job. And I stayed in that position for a while. And then I moved into a detective position and then got promoted up to supervisory ranks. But when Sheriff Berry brought me in as his chief deputy, the reason he did so was because of my interest in training. And he was wanting to take his sheriff's office and prepare it for the 21st century.
Okay.
And it was like, look, I need to transition from what I've got good guys, but I need to transition them to deal with the world that's coming. And so I was brought in to be that transitional step.
Okay. Was that, I'm sure so that was after 9/11 or was that before?
Oh yeah.
We saw this huge technology shift and transfer and, different gear under the Clinton administration, really. And then, after, I guess, coming out of the 80s, going into the 90s, we saw a lot more gear and a lot more technology going to law enforcement, a whole lot of different grant opportunities to law enforcement agencies to outfit their squad. And then after the kind of shit show that was 9/11 with the communication failures, right? There was all this new technology that was brought in that a lot of even local municipalities, smaller units, adopted. Was it after that point where your sheriff decided to kind of implement some of this technology into your department?
Yeah, well, I went to the academy in 99. 9/11 happened in 2001. I still hadn't been promoted to corporal at that point.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. Now I was in field training the day Columbine happened.
Okay.
And I talked about this in the episode that you mentioned with Daryl Bulkey. During the academy, they're telling us that, oh, you patrol guys, you set up a perimeter and the SWAT teams will go in and deal with all the heavy lifting. And then Columbine happens while I'm in field training. And so just a few months out of field training is they get us all together and say, no, what we got to do is form the 5-man teams and go in and deal with the problem immediately. Well, it wasn't, it took a few years. They realized that, okay, the first guy on scene's got to go in and stop the problem now. Because the longer you allow an active shooter situation to go, the higher your body count is. Now, 9/11 did happen shortly before I was promoted to training officer. But just basically the reason the sheriff brought me in, he had great guys and they knew the basic job of being a deputy sheriff, but the world was changing around us. And the things that were coming with body cameras and technology, and you're going from writing reports, handwritten reports, to them being on computer. Mm-hmm. And he just wanted a fresh perspective to bring in and kind of point the agency in a new modern direction. And so that's when I came in March of 2009.
Okay.
And I did too good of a job because the people I brought up and trained replaced me.
It's kind of what you want to happen though, right? At least on the surface, you tell people that, right?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. The guy that is now the chief deputy and that I report to, like the second or third time I went with him with a question about something, about how he wanted to do something, he just looked at me and said, "Whatever you would have told me to do, you just go do that." And that's been the way we've left it since then. So it's a pretty cool gig. So now all I do now is training.
I love it. So that walked you into the professional training world. Mm-hmm. When did you start training? What made you get into training civilians?
Oh, well, at the sheriff's office, we have a citizens firearms training program. And, Sheriff Barry was very big on, the contact with the public in positive fashion. And so we did have a citizen firearms training program. And so we were constantly, if you were a firearms instructor with the sheriff's office, you taught those classes.
Okay.
And so those were my first real interactions with teaching with the public. And it's a big difference in the enthusiasm level. But it's also a big difference in the fact, the guys that have been through the police academy, they know to stand on the line. They know that you don't just walk off in the middle of a course of fire, because you realize you left something back at your bag or whatever. So there's those drastic differences along those ways. As when I worked with the PD, I was training in someone else's program. And then when I went to the sheriff's office, now I'm running the program. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to, find better material, better ways of doing things. I wanted to expand our program, improve it. And so I began seeking out quality training. And I'm not saying that the training that I got as a cop wasn't quality, but, I began seeking out training from people like Tom Givens.
Right.
And, sheriff told me that I could go to any training that I wanted to, as long as I brought the material back to the agency. Well, you can't give me open-ended orders that way, because I have to stay within my budget.
That's right.
And so,
and some of that stuff, when you're learning from the greats like Tom Givens, is really hard to translate,
Right.
You can pick up the training, but it doesn't necessarily mean you can deliver it as effectively.
Right. And so what I started doing was hosting a lot of courses. And, we would get a couple of spots because we hosted the courses, and I would take one of the spots and one of our other instructors would take one of the other spots. And that's how I took my first class with Dave Spalding that way. Mm-hmm. Same thing with Tom. I hosted him, is how I took my first class with him. So as a way to get to more training, I started teaching classes of my own, and then I would take the money that I made from those classes that I taught, and I would pay for other training for me, or I would pay for other training for some of our instructors. And so that's how my business got started, was just as a revenue stream to be able for us to go to more classes.
Very cool. And you've advanced though now, right? Like you're teaching stuff. So I don't know what the laws are in Georgia. Mm-hmm. A lot of places in the country, and I'll just speak to what I know about here in Maryland. Everybody just to purchase a handgun has to take some level of training in Maryland. You have to take what's called your HQL, your handgun qualification license. I don't know if there's something similar down in Georgia, but that's not something that's offered by the sheriff's department. Generally, you have to go to industry and basically pay a fee to exercise your right. You have to pay it to somebody like us to teach you, the proficiency and the minimum standard to be able to even purchase a handgun. And the resultant of that, essentially, the kind of capstone of that class really is firing one live round. It's just not enough training to get somebody proficient. And then we offer, then the same way up here, we are a May issue state. So we do concealed carry training as well. And then the basic pistol, basic carbine, different stuff like that everybody else offers as well. We also bring in, talented instructors like yourself. We host them up here in Maryland as well. But there's a difference, Lee. At some point, you transition from teaching your basic fundamentals of firearms, out behind the sheriff's department or wherever that range was, and then adapted to doing stuff like you have the course coming up in April, the carbine class, right? The up close and personal with your favorite carbine or whatever you call it. It's a pretty aggressive class. What made you transition to be like, okay, I don't want to just teach you how to be, a safe firearms owner. I want to teach you actually how to use these firearms to defend yourself in any situation you may find yourself in.
Well, first of all, I've got to point out some terminology. It is sheriff's office. The D word should never be combined with the word sheriff.
Okay.
If other places do that, they're wrong. The sheriff is an elected official. The sheriff heads an office.
You got it. You know what? I'm going to make sure that I keep that written down.
And here in Georgia, the sheriff is a constitutional official. We are not a D word of the county government. Okay. We are a separate independent office under the Constitution of the state of Georgia as God intended it.
Hey, power to you.
God intended it. All right. As I started teaching the classes, at first I started out, I was going to be a niche kind of guy. I was going to do classes that nobody else was doing so that I wouldn't be in direct competition with everyone else that hung out a shingle. Mm-hmm. And let me back up for just a second. Georgia does not have any kind of training requirement to purchase a firearm. And there's also no training requirement to obtain what we call the weapons carry license. You just go to the probate court and they issue it, provided you don't have a criminal background. But you can also have a weapon in your vehicle, your home, and your property, and your place of business without a carry license.
Okay.
You just can't carry it in public without the carry license.
Where, like open and concealed, or either?
Well, we don't make a distinction between concealed or open carry under our law. You have to have the carry license to carry outside of the 3 accepted places.
Okay.
So I started off teaching more niche classes and they didn't sell really well. So I went more mainstream with my pistol offerings and shotgun offerings. And from there, I built up a pretty loyal customer basis in my area. And they wanted to, well, we've taken this pistol class 3 times. What can we do now? Mm-hmm. And so I kind of expanded more and more on what I offered. And, use that kind of as a laboratory for creating what I think is a pretty solid curriculum. And of course, with that, Tom Givens took me under his wing right from the start. And so I have spent a lot of time traveling with Tom to be his assistant instructor in classes. And, thank God my previous sheriff, is part of what I was doing with the firearms program, encouraged that, let me have the time to go do that. And then, I formed a relationship with other guys. Like I said, I brought Dave Spalding in, ended up taking 4 or 5 of Dave's classes, and I'm now certified through him as an instructor as well. And so several things, and several of the other noted firearms instructors took note of what I was doing, and they helped along with that process too. So there's a lot of other people's stuff that I've kind of taken and melded and put my own spin on and then expanded. So, if you come to one of my classes, you're going to hear some Givens, you're going to hear from Spalding, you're going to hear some other, but you're going to hear my interpretation of that. So it's not Tom Light or Dave Light or whatever, but it's, it's everything that I have learned over the years of doing this and being able to apply it. I know you said you've listened to several episodes of the show that I do. One of the things that you look at from the academic side of levels of knowledge is there's a thing called Bloom's taxonomy. And it's basically a triangle or pyramid shaped thing where it's levels of knowledge. And on that bottom level is just you've been exposed to the material. So you go take a class and you can repeat back what you learned in that class. You're just at the bottom level of that knowledge. And as you move up through that, you begin where you can start applying levels of knowledge. And then when it gets to the top, you can actually start synthesizing your own material. But one of the other steps of that is that you can actually start comparing other, challenging your knowledge level and comparing it to other things that you learn and start to make value choices. And all of that comes before you can start synthesizing your own material. And I got my first firearms instructor certification in 2003 through the Georgia Public Safety Training Center. We call it GPSTIC for short, because everything in cop world's got an acronym nickname.
There you go. Same in the military.
Yeah. I felt like I started to know what I was doing about 2016.
Oh, wow.
And in the last year or two, I feel like I can actually start speaking as an authority.
Okay.
And so it's been a long time to get up to that, level where I can start synthesizing my own material. And, so if you come to one of my classes, it's me, but all these other people make up part of me.
Oh, and you see that everywhere. My day job is an engineer, right? Newton discovered that apple falling from the tree, but I use his theories, the fundamental theories of physics every day. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So no, I get that. And I appreciate that. And I listened to the one with you and Spencer particularly, and you were talking about the differences between, technical versus application.
Mm-hmm.
And, and that's, hey, I encourage everybody real quick. I'm not going to get into it with Lee here, but go over there and find That Weems Guy. Find the episode with Spencer if you like Spencer, or if you like Lee, all right? Go find them, listen to that episode. You're going to get a lot of information there. And also, Lee does a very good job of explaining his credentials in that episode as well. So,
well, I was a little angry at the start of that one.
Yeah, hey, you did a good job, man.
I was a little angry and I had a point to prove, and I needed to speak in a manner in which I could clearly be understood.
There you go. Hopefully you recorded that one in like the morning before you got into the whiskey or the bourbon or whatever y'all drink down there in Georgia, right?
Well, nice I can't hold my ice cream. I can't hold my ice cream, so I don't touch the whiskey or the bourbon. So
that's all. I got it. So you've been in this quite a while. You said you got your first, instructor certification in 2003. You felt like you knew what you were doing 13 years later in 2016. That's a lot of introspection. You're looking at what Lee's got, what Lee can offer, how Lee can develop. But I want to ask you something else a little bit different. So you've been in this game 20 years. Okay. What have you noticed? And I asked this to a lot of different people here, so I always get a kick out of this question because nobody's answer is ever the same. But I want to ask you, what have you noticed in, I guess, the quality or the caliber of student over that 20 years?
It seems to be growing as far as the types of people that are coming into it. Of course, especially these last couple of years, there's been, millions of new gun owners. It does seem to be growing as far as like the diversity of people who are interested. So you're getting a lot of more people that are coming into it that really and truly have no idea what they're getting into. And I say this, and I don't mean this negatively. When I first found the open enrollment world in 2014, I looked around at some of the private citizens that had really dedicated themselves to training and learning how to run a gun. I had a lot of wow factor. Oh, wow, look at these guys. They've really learned how to do it. And I don't know that if it's over the years, the game has slowed down, so to speak, or that, we're getting such a wide range of people that are coming into it now. That the talent level maybe has dropped a little bit, but I think it's more of a fact that social media has basically created a more instantaneous, I want to be an instructor now, versus building up your baseline of skills before you start trying to step out and teach others. There's people that they go out, buy a gun, take 1 or 2 classes, and they want to take an instructor certification course and hang out their own shingle. I did one episode comparing firearms instruction to martial arts training and what the level of experience is for a martial arts instructor. And basically the consensus is you've been doing it 8 to 10 years, and like some of the serious systems like BJJ, before
BJJ,
you actually start.
You've got to hold your brown belt, which means you actually have to teach as a brown belt to even come close to qualifying for your black belt. And you're years into it by that point.
There's an apprenticeship process that goes along with that. And we just don't have that in firearms instruction. And, give me a weekend and I could get a 12-year-old to pass the NRA basic, pistol instructor course. And so I think we're getting a lot of people that are jumping in and getting instructor certifications that are hanging out shingles and calling themselves instructors that really aren't skilled enough to do that. And so it's a shame because we're at an all-time need for quality firearms instructors. We're losing places to shoot.
That's right.
Which is the biggest threat to Second Amendment. It's not political, it's apathy. And apathy is born of just people who grow up being non-gun. And I have to give Steve Anderson credit for that phrase. They grow up being non-gun, so then they hear certain things coming out of, well, that sounds reasonable, and they don't know to oppose it because of what it really means and what it leads to. So we're in the golden age of firearms instruction because there's more quality information that's available out there, but it's the dissemination of that and getting it to the people that need it the most.
Absolutely.
And we have the most critical time for people in their skill development is the very beginning of their training journey. And that's when they need to be with the most qualified instructors, not the least qualified instructors. But that's not what happens in the industry.
No, and it's not what happens really in any industry. You don't ever go out there and buy a Lamborghini for your first car. It's just, it's unfortunately, it is, it's unfortunate, but it's just the way it is. People buy what their budget can afford. They buy what their schedule can afford. That's it. And as you were mentioning, there's these people that grew up non-gun. They don't know what they're missing. Right. It's an elevated, different perspective that you get from being in a growing up gun or growing up non-gun. It's a good term, by the way.
It's Steve Anderson's. It's not mine.
Steve Anderson. I'm going to put him on my list of sheet here.
I'll point you to another person, and that's Carl Wren.
Yeah, I've been wanting to talk to Carl Wren.
It's KR Training out of Texas, just outside of Austin, and Giddings or Lincoln. And Carl did a great series of work on what he calls beyond the 1%. And basically he did an analysis of all the numbers in Texas of people who get what they call their license to carry training. And then what they can get beyond the 1% of the Texas population that goes and gets their training, what it takes to get them back out for additional training. And he's got a series of articles about that up on his training at krtraining.com, on his webpage at that address. And, I took a lot of that to heart when I was working, developing my business. And it's not a road to profit or glory. It's doing a lot of the grunt work instruction, but that's what needs to be done.
Oh, you're right. This is what here's a little bit, let me spin it up a little bit. Now you're right. And I want to get into a conversation with you about a company, or not a company, it's nonprofit, it's an organization called Project Appleseed. I just had on one of the Maryland guys. It's our most recent episode that came out before we're recording this, and we're recording this, and this will obviously probably come out a week or two from now. But Project Appleseed teaches that civic responsibility for very young marksmen. They come out, it's rimfire. Generally, it's a rimfire course. They teach basic fundamentals of riflemanship, marksmanship, safety. They're shooting a whole bunch of rounds of 22. But they also in the breaks, they teach you about the Revolutionary War and why the Second Amendment is so important, different stuff like that. They really instill that civic responsibility to defend your right to bear arms, or else you're going to lose that right. So there's a lot that goes in there, and you're talking about it. The best place to get a hold of, the best place to insert quality training in somebody's life is when they're new to it. And that's what I was alluding to here with the quality of students over time. What we've realized is oftentimes your best student is somebody who's never picked up a gun before.
Oh yeah.
Right? Because they don't have any bad habits. And there's this Chinese philosophy that says, pour out your cup. You know, when you come to me with an empty cup so I could fill it. Right. And it doesn't mean waste your cup. It means drink that shit, absorb that information, you know, let me build on top of that, but come to me empty so I could give you the good candy. Right. There's a lot that goes into that, but you know, the YouTube the technology in general with Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and everything else that I can't keep up. I've got 2 teenage kids. They know about all the other stuff. I don't. I think maybe one day I might make it big on TikTok. I don't know. We'll see what happens there. But in a previous life, before I enlisted in the military and before I became an engineer, I was a carpenter, and I ended up getting my journeyman status there as a carpenter. And I was a finished carpenter in my later days in that industry. So I did, you know, crown molding and doors and all this other really beautiful trim work, custom cabinetry, all this other stuff. In 2014, when I moved up to Maryland from Arizona to go to college, my brother lives here. A few years later, he ended up buying a house and he wanted to put crown molding up throughout the house. And he asked me, he was like, hey, I'm thinking about putting crown molding up. And I said, all right, just give me a call one night. I'll come over and help you out. He's like, no, I got to figure it out, man. I watched a YouTube video. And I looked him right in the eye and I said, oh, you watched the video? I said, shit, man, you got this. Don't worry about it. Nah, you're going to do great. My dad's there. Right. And he's watching this whole interaction. He's like just shaking his head because there's only so much you can get without hands-on training.
Right.
And what you were mentioning with Carl Rand, you know, the 1%ers, and then who actually comes back for more training. That's something that needs to be measured. You know, like I mentioned, in Maryland, you get your HQL, you fire 1 live round. How many of these people will ever shoot that gun again? And then when nature calls, as I like to say, and you've actually got to put that firearm to work, you resort to your highest level of training, right? Which is that 1 live round. But what happens at 3 a.m., someone's kicking down the door, the dogs are barking, the kids are screaming, for some reason, the light's not turning on, right? You've got your fancy biometric safe there next to the headstand. You can't get your firearm out. Before you know it, you're running through the house, lasering everybody, and you don't know what the hell to do, let alone get a good sight picture, right? Put your stance in properly and effectively reduce the threat level, right? You're not going to be trained for that. You have got to seek out, you've got to continuously seek out training. It's like a language, Lee. You know, the best time to teach Spanish or a second language to a kid or to a person is when they're a kid. I think the best time to teach firearms fundamentals of safety and different things like that is to maybe late elementary, middle school kids, right? That's about the right time for me, I think, when somebody could hold a rifle, right, and be safe with it. But if you don't practice, you're going to forget it, just like a second language. You're going to end up forgetting it if you don't practice it. So yeah, I'm completely with you there. So that's when you transition. I'm taking a hard right back to where we were just talking here. So that's hey, I don't do this for a living, so don't make fun of me. Right? I heard you recently, you make money on your podcast. I don't even do that. I'm doing this for the pleasure of it, buddy.
Oh, hold on a second. Let me check the numbers. Check my numbers right here.
I think this morning yesterday you were at $8 or something.
I am at $12.66 right now. And that's through 20 episodes.
Man, you're balling, man. You're going to quit the sheriff's office, right? Make
That's right.
That right. You'll be retiring from there pretty soon and telling Tom and Dave and everybody else that you're too busy for them. Now you're a big iTunes and Spotify star.
That's right. My empire. John Correa, watch out. You think that YouTube channel is big money? Wait till you see my podcast.
Oh man. One of these days, man, we'll both make it big. All right. But so that's what, all right. So you started 2003, you felt you were good, that's when you got your first instructor license. 2016, you started teaching other people. You felt like you were ready to really start teaching other people. And then we talked a little bit about the quality of the student over that time frame. And what I enjoyed there actually was you kind of talked about the quality of the instructor too, which was pretty good. I didn't ask that, but you definitely explained it pretty well. This is another question I always like to ask everybody when they come on the show is, if there was 3 things that Lee, if I'm Mike Bell, and I am Mike Bell, and if Mike Bell comes to Lee's class and I take your favorite class, which I'll ask you what that is in a minute. If I take your favorite class and I leave on my way, what are the 3 fundamentals you hope I take with me?
One is accountability. You're accountable for every decision that you make with a firearm. And quite frankly, that is much more important than the pure technical skill. And so my training is built around that issue. My primary core class, I used to call it defensive pistol skills. I'm calling it Pistol Craft 1 now because I just revamped my training lineup. It is all about moving around this world while armed and how to function with the firearm if you have to use it in a real world environment, as much as we can do in a flat square range environment with paper targets. So accountability, I think that tops everything else. Doesn't matter how good you are. If you've got a sub-second draw to a non-legally justified shot,
doesn't matter, right?
The jury's not,
you're getting locked up.
The jury's not going to be impressed with your technical skill there. So that's the biggest thing. I think that trumps everything else as far as, you are having life, you're walking around with a life and death decision in your hands. And then the quality of life that you're going to live afterwards. And with that, you need to understand that it's something you should be very reluctant to do as far as actually deploying deadly force. If you're walking around in the world with the attitude that you just can't wait to check that box, I got to tell you, it is completely life altering. Even if everything is perfectly legally justified and you get the best possible outcomes imaginable, it's still going to change your life, and not necessarily in a good way. So you should only do that when that's the only available opportunity left. And of course, the other thing is that when everyone thinks through scenarios in their own mind, they always envision themselves as the winner.
That's right.
And that's just not the case either. I always picture myself losing, and what can I do to stop it or avoid it?
That's powerful, man. In communication classes, and I'm sure you've taken this, when what was that? You've probably been, oh, never mind. I'm not going to do an age joke because you're about my age, but it's been a while since you've been in college. In communication classes, when they're talking about doing interviews and stuff like this, and I'm not a pro at this, but I've done some studying, right? You always want to make people feel like they're the hero of their own story. That's what gets people talking, right? And that's my work I've been using on you this whole episode, Lee. So you feel like the victim if you want to, but people want to feel like they're the hero of their own story so much that's the ego that they have in their own head, right? They're always right. They're never wrong, right? They have no accountability. They're everything is somebody else's problem. I'm not saying everybody's like that, but a majority of, maybe not even a majority, people, right, are like that. And you made some good points there. And, being realistic, skeptic, opportunistic, if you will, looking at the situation, figuring out if I'm in this position, how can I become, if I'm the loser, if I'm losing here, how can I pivot? Right. Looking at it from that different angle, I think is something that everybody should do a little bit more of. That's very good. Yep. I like that, man. So just so I'm not putting words in your mouth here, what you were saying at the three was, the first one is accountability.
Right.
The second one was everybody needs to try to be reluctant to deploy deadly force.
Right.
And then everybody imagines themselves as the winner. What would you want somebody to pivot that in their head?
Yeah. When people think of, say, they get confronted on a parking lot and someone tries to rob them, and it's a very simple legal question. You would think that in the face of an armed robbery that you could use deadly force, and that the world's going to see it that way, that you were completely and legally totally justified. But that's just not the case. Are you willing to risk your employer firing you because you're all over the news because you were involved in a deadly force confrontation? So the only time you should be willing to get into that type of confrontation or deploy that type of deadly forces is if you don't, you're dead.
That's right.
Or someone's dragging your daughter towards a car, and if you don't stop them, you're never going to see her again. Okay, you must live in the must paradigm, is the way I like to rephrase it, like to call that. You got the different conjugations of the to be verb. You got the can, which is the ability. You got may, which is legality or permissiveness. And then you got must, which means there's no other option. And so before you employ deadly forces, you must be in that must paradigm. People that you've had a cordial relationship with are now going to think of you as a killer. And you may lose friendships or social connections that you had. We had a deputy in late 2020 that was involved in a shooting, which was an absolute stone cold, legally justified use of deadly force. When a person holds up a knife that the blade is long enough to stick through you and come out the other side, and a blowtorch,
sounds like a barbecue,
and says, "I'm going to kill you."
Oh, now we're not at a barbecue anymore.
Yeah, and then charges across the room towards you.
I'm gonna be drawn probably.
All right. Well, he deployed deadly force, and unfortunately, she did not live through the encounter. Completely stone cold justified. But there are people that watch the body cam video from that shooting and want to, all the things that were done wrong. Yeah, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? And everything. Well, they tried to talk her down for 17 minutes. They tried to tase her. They tried to do these other things. And then she says, "I'm going to kill you," and charges at him with a knife. Completely and totally legally justified, but he's had to face some social ramifications from that.
That's right.
Now, in that situation, it was a deputy sheriff, but if you're the person that's involved in that in the parking lot of your apartment complex or the driveway of your house or the parking lot at a gas station, you can live in the most wonderful neighborhood in the world, or you can live in complete isolation where you don't come into contact with other people at home, but you still have to go to the gas station and the grocery store.
That's right.
And I've been in almost deadly force deployment situations in both of those settings. If you shoot a guy in the grocery store parking lot, are you prepared to deal with the social ramifications of that?
Especially today, right?
Right. And so that's something you should only do if there's no other choice about it than to do so. And I just, that's what training needs to be imparting to people, as well as the technical skill. And now there's nothing wrong with achieving a high level of technical skill. There's nothing wrong with going out and shooting matches and doing this, which are all contests of skill and applying the rule set of a particular game. There's a lot of benefit to that. But you got to be able to apply that in the real world.
That's right.
As well.
A lot of that's understanding the law.
Right.
Right. That's why I think that, for yourself, being from Georgia and being in law enforcement and then teaching firearms instruction in Georgia and other places, you're real familiar with that law. It's my favorite, and it's the boring stuff, right? It's everybody wants to get their gun and holster up and get out on the range and start putting rounds down range. But there's so much more to it. You're right, man. Nobody wants to be the news story, right? Nobody wants to do that. And not only that, and you touched on this, right? There's the social ramifications of it, but there's also the brevity of living with that decision the rest of your life, right? The nightmares, a lot of law enforcement, military, and even some civilians, right? They have to carry that with them the rest of their life. And it's not something you should wish on anybody, right? Somebody that takes joy out of taking another person's life is probably a criminal. You know what I mean? I think even in a self-defense situation where you're defending people you love and you have to employ deadly force like that, you're probably still going to have some shit going on in your head at the end of the day. So
my friend John Hearn coined a phrase, and it pains me to have to give John credit for something good. He coined a phrase of, you got antisocial violence, which is violence with no social redeeming value whatsoever. But then there's pro-social violence. And that's violence in which there is a redeeming social value. And pro-social violence, an example would be, if you were confronted with that deadly force situation on the parking lot or wherever it happens, and you use deadly force in a completely legally justified moral way, and you took an evil person out of the world, there are some pro-social benefits to that on the greater scheme, not necessarily for you individually, but for
in the ether of humanity.
Yeah. Wayne Dobbs is a great firearms trainer out of Texas. He's partners with Daryl Bolke, and I've heard Wayne use this phrase as, sometimes God just wants you to pluck a weed from his garden.
That's right.
And
that's a good point.
Yeah, it's just a Texas way of putting things.
Yeah.
So while you don't necessarily see like a personal joy from it,
there's pro-social ramifications.
Yeah, people that say that violence is never the answer just don't understand the world.
Yeah, that's right, man. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think we went a little dark there. your fundamentals that you want to impart on some people, really what they add up to is there is weight to be carried when you're carrying a firearm, and you decide that you're going to be, what did you call it? Pistol craft, where you're living in the world with the firearm.
Yeah.
Right. When you decide to employ pistol craft and be a human in the world carrying a firearm, there's some weight that goes around with that. A lot of responsibility, accountability, decisions that need to be made. I forget who it was who I was talking to that said this, but I think it was Matt Watson from up here in Virginia. And you should talk to him. He's a great guy. Long history. He's a combat medic, Army. Long time, got out, teaches SWAT up in Northern Virginia. He's a good guy. I'm not sure if you've met him or not, Matt Watson.
I'm not familiar.
But he was saying, well, for one, he talked about the brevity of the situation, right? Being prepared for what happens after you take that shot, right? But yeah, anyhow, Matt Watt's a good guy. I'm going to get out of this dark hole we're digging ourselves into here. Let's bring it back to something a little bit happier. All right.
Shooting is fun. The actual just poking on the paper is fun.
It is a blast, man. It's a big difference though. And I've heard you say this, and the people in the industry and military law enforcement know this, right? There's a big difference between, putting sights on paper and putting sights on a human being. And
Yes.
We don't need to walk down that path here. Let me reel this back home a little bit, Lee.
All right.
So what is you teach a lot of different classes, and it sounds as if you've kind of retooled your class structure to follow a certain curriculum that's going to develop that pistol craft or rifle craft or whatever craft it is throughout, right? From fundamentals to expert. What would you say is your favorite class to teach? And I got a follow-on question. So what's your favorite class to teach?
The class that I'm now calling Pistolcraft 1 is my favorite.
Why is that?
Because it encompasses everything that we just talked about. It puts the whole package, I think, together. And let me be clear, I've got Pistolcraft 1 through 4. Okay. But those numbers are not analogs to what any other instructor is out there doing. And what I mean by that is, okay, you go take somebody what they call their pistol level 1. That doesn't mean you come to my pistol level 2, or if you come to my pistol level 1, you skip their level 1 and go to their level 2.
Sure.
What I'm calling Pistolcraft 1 through 4 they mean nothing to my curriculum. And so that's not an egotistical thing. It's just that I had to call them something.
Yeah.
And I'm dividing my classes into what I call technical classes and what I call the application classes. And all of my Pistolcraft series are all application classes. But just that basic Pistolcraft 1 is my favorite.
All right, very cool. And what you're saying there is maybe not how they translate, but it opens up to the follow-on question that I wanted to ask you. Mm-hmm. So there are, and not as much as this is a good thing. There's not a lot of big egos in the firearms instruction industry. There are some, but there's not a lot, right? What I would ask you for your basic, for that, the basic Pistolcraft 1 of 4 class, who would you, if you had to choose somebody, who out there in instruction land would you choose to teach the class for you if you couldn't do it?
Oh, to teach the class for me?
Yeah. So you get to name your favorite instructor right now for this class only, though, for Pistolcraft 1 of 4.
Well, obviously, Tom Givens and Dave Spalding are my mentors in this world. As far as contemporary peers, there are 3 names that immediately jump to mind. One would be John Murphy, who is based out of Culpeper, Virginia, but is now traveling the world in an RV, teaching all over the country. He has a class called Concealed Carry, or Street Encounters, Advanced Skills and Tactics, that while our material is different, the overall picture that you're going to get is going to be the same. John Hearn of Two Pillars Training is another guy who has a class called Cognitive Pistol Skills, and which again, we're not all running. We might be running the same drills, but we will be teaching them in with a different context, or we're using context for the same stuff. And then a guy named Eric Gelhaus, who is based out of California. Those are probably the 3 most contemporary guys that are out there with their own training companies that would be along those same lines. Now, there are a lot of other great guys and ladies out there doing it. And then, of course, I would be remiss if I did not point out to my own assistant guy, and he's more than an assistant. We call him the director of engineering for first person safety, and he's the Magnificent Steve. I have 2 friends. Steve. I have 2 very close friends in the gun world named Steve, and so to distinguish them, one is the Magnificent Steve, the other one is the other Steve.
Nice.
The Magnificent Steve could step in and teach my curriculum. If for some reason I wasn't able to make it to a class that was scheduled, Steve could just step right up and run with my curriculum and go. Cool. As much as I have traveled the world with Givens learning Ranger Master stuff, Steve has traveled the world with me. And Steve, very, very gifted on his own, very studious and dedicated on his own. And he trains with lots of other people as well. But he's been with me right from the start. of first person safety and knows the curriculum as I lay it out extremely well.
Very good. Very good. Yeah. And that's, I asked that question because I like to try to break down the ego a little bit. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that naturally follows into this next question I want to ask you. Well, we mentioned earlier, right? Training training isn't an event, right? It's a way of life, right? It's a journey, if you will. It's not something you do once and then you're done. You don't learn a task once and you're done. Training, lifetime learning is what I'm getting at here. So who does Lee Weems want to go and take training from next?
Oh, wow. As far as who would I want to go training from next, there's still a list of a few people that I've not been able to get to.
Okay.
And so I'm going to answer this two different ways. If I were a new person just starting out, I would go straight to the Range Master system. Mm-hmm. And I also would have to give plugs to the Handgun Combatives system there with Dave still teaching that. To me, Tom Givens is the best in the world as far as preparing someone mentally to go out in the world with a gun. And then Dave Spalding's system of actually running the gun, I think, is actually the most intuitive one out there. As far as people that I still want to train with, I would like to take a class with Randy Kane, who was a old-time gun sight guy who has his own school based in Randy lives, I think, in either Tennessee or North Carolina, but he teaches mostly in Florida. It's just one of those guys that the schedule has just never seemed to come together where I could get when he was teaching in the location that he was teaching. Mm-hmm. So I really like to take something from Randy. Jared Reston is another guy who I've not been able to make the schedules work. Jared was a Jacksonville, Florida sheriff's deputy that he recently retired, and he's now out on his own with his own business resting group, and he also works for Safariland. At some point in time, that's going to happen. And of course, there's all kind of stuff. If you want to get into shotgun, I've never been able to make a schedule with Rob Hott work, and so I'd like to see that happen as well. But Tim Chandler and Ashton Ray offer great shotgun product out there as well. So there are lots of people that I would love to. I'd love to spend 3 weekends a month on the range as a student and 1 weekend a month shooting. But
we got lives, right? You know what you ought to do is just go ahead and get yourself an ammo sponsorship and a pistol and a shotgun and a rifle sponsorship and get out there and just make it happen. How about that?
Yeah. Well, I've got $12 and whatever cents to play with here, so it's rolling in.
So another question, and I'm going to answer this one myself, and then I'll give you an opportunity. And it follows on to this last question: who would you seek training from? The one thing that I need to get better at in my firearms world, right? In my, I guess you would call it somebody that carries a firearm, is drawing from the concealed carry, right? Just quickly and getting sights out there. That's something that I know I need to work on. And, in the Army and in different places in my life, we always do after action reports, right? We don't make people do that on the range. It's very militaristic. And then you're asking people to recall. It's just not something that we generally do. It's a good idea, and I'm not knocking anybody who does it. There's a time and a place for that. But I like to look internally and say, what could I have done different? Or how could I improve this? And if we're not constantly learning, right, then that's a problem. And I asked you, where would you seek training from? Kind of at the end there, it came out that you would like to do some shotgun training stuff. What is the one skill that you think that you could get, that you need to get better at, or that you wish you were better at?
Oh, definitely. I wish I was better with some sort of hand-to-hand martial art.
There you go.
Type deal. I have a very limited background as far as that goes.
Okay.
Something non-deadly force is where I would like to see my skill set improve.
There you go. I just talked to somebody the other day, man. His name's Matt State. He runs, it's the Modern Samurai, but it's over in England. It's a little different than what's going on here in the United States, but I talked to him. The episode hasn't came out yet. But over there, you don't carry firearms, right? You don't. The crime they have is knife related. And this guy, he's been in the industry. He was a doorman. He did private security professionally for a really long time. And we were talking about the differences, because I wanted to get his perspective on self-defense training, right, and martial arts, because I think that's something everybody should have. And the opportunity in the distance between 0 and 3 feet, right? That's where your firearm's not going to work. You know what I'm saying? If you can't get your arm out there, you can shoot from the chest or from the hip, but still. And so I talked to him about it, and they do a lot of the very similar training over there that we do here. We were talking about a class that we have coming up, vehicle ambush class. And he's like, yeah, I do the same class, but there's no gun involved, right? What if somebody assaults you on the bridge and tries to jump in your car, but you don't have a gun to get them off of you? And for people who are used to carrying, that's a situation they hadn't considered. They're like, well, I'll just pull my gun out. You know what I mean? Well, what if you don't got a gun? What if they take it from you? What if you don't have it? Then you're at that next level, like, oh shit, So it was interesting talking to somebody to kind of talk to me about self-defense whenever there's not a firearm involved, right? Like if the biggest weapon you could bring to a fight is a knife, right? And not a gun. It's just a different world, man.
Or these.
Yeah, or your hands. That's right. You bring fist to a knife fight. You try not to get cut up. People do it. Krav Maga is real big at that, and so is jiu-jitsu at moving bodies and doing using momentum to leverage bodies around. So is judo, for that matter. So that's very cool, man. I've kept you on here. I know you like to run long. I listen to your episodes, a few of them. I'm not diligent. In fact, I mentioned I just barely discovered you recently, but I know you like to talk for a while. So, we could keep going on this, but I'm on the East Coast. I think you're on the East Coast. You're down in Georgia. So it's probably 9 o'clock there for you too, man. But I got to get the kids in bed and get them locked up. So with that, Lee, where can people find more of Lee, and where can they find more of that Weems guy that I keep hearing about?
Well, on the social media, First Person Safety on Facebook and Instagram, although I don't do much with the Instagram account. And then firstpersonsafety.com is the webpage. If they search That Weems Guy on all the podcasts platforms, they'll find the show for that. And then the episodes are also posted on YouTube under Lee Weems. I was very creative in the name of my channel.
It sounds like the way that you titled or the description for your podcast, it's me talking with people about stuff.
Yeah.
How can you hate on it? First of all, you can't hate that, because that is it. At the end of the day, the only way you can break your own rules is if you don't have anybody else on.
That's right. I think. So, right. It's a show about nothing. Seinfeld got like 8 or 9 seasons out of that. So it was.
Love Seinfeld. I love Seinfeld, man. So that's very cool. Obviously, head over to First Person Safety. Look at the training, the upcoming training. Lee, I'm going to try to. Shitty news here. You told us you're only doing like 5 classes next year. I was going to ask you, what is it going to take to get you up to Maryland to teach a class? It's only, I think it's 3 hours north of Cavalier. So it's not that much farther. Maybe we'll come down and see if we can't get you, locked in down there. But more to follow, guys. And if you like what we're doing here on this show, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. But more importantly, find Lee, support him, support your local range. If you're on travel, you're in the Georgia area or in that kind of eastern coastal area there, seek out what Lee's doing. Support his podcast, That Weems Guy. Find a YouTube channel, give him some thumbs up over there, show him some love. We got to get this guy some money so we can get out to some more training, man. And then, of course, with us, guys, hit that share button. That's all we're asking. Cost of admission is free. We just ask you to hit the share button. So with that, guys, and with that, Lee, we're out here. Everybody remember, learn, defend, prevail. We're out.